So a few days ago, I asked members of my channel, who are members through the Buy Me a Coffee Club thing, to ask any questions they wanted, basically. And I like this format. I think I like this format. We'll see how this video goes. Because it's quite difficult to kind of generate all of my own content, my ideas for content. And it's quite nice to actually respond to real questions from real people that I know, people actually want answers to. So I do encourage you, if you've got any more questions, to add them to the description of this video. And there'll probably be quite a few follow-ups to some of the things that I say in this video, because some of the questions were quite contentious or unusual. So I've got my iPad here because I can't remember all of the questions, and I have kind of written up a brief version of the answers to these questions as well, if you prefer to read rather than to listen and watch. So the first one is Wendy. So Wendy asked, can I keep my potatoes safely in their tubs outside until we eat our way through them, or should they be moved into the garage over winter? Will frost damage them for eating? Well, I have no experience of keeping my potatoes outside all year round. I do think that they, from what I've seen on other YouTube channels and my experience of keeping potatoes for part of the year outside and for the whole year and into sort of April in my mini greenhouse, this is basically what I've concluded. So the first thing is, if they get too wet, you can get a little bit of scab growing on them. And I suppose if they get really wet, then potentially there's a risk of them rotting. If they get too cold, frozen basically, then you can lose the crop if you leave them in containers. Now, my experience is my potatoes, when left outside, have never frozen yet. But then we don't get really hard frosts. So a really hard frost for us might be like -4 degrees centigrade. And I don't think an overnight frost of that severity will penetrate the kind of plastic of the tub and the kind of compost layer before you get to the potatoes. Some potatoes pushed right up against the side of the tubs, perhaps they might get frozen, so you might lose a few of them. I've always kept mine in a mini greenhouse that just provides a little bit of extra protection, and I've never had any damage from frost. But as I say, -4 is a bad frost for me here. So I would say if you're going to, so the biggest concern actually is not just an overnight frost. So last year we actually had, I think, 3 days of continuous frost. So it was below zero for 3 whole days. And that would freeze solid, probably a container. And if your container freezes solid, then your potatoes are frozen solid and you'll probably lose the crop. We lost out in our storage shed almost all anyway, of our crown prince squash on that time, and we've never lost them in previous years. But even though we kind of covered them and wrapped them up and all of that sort of thing, they just couldn't stand 3 days of frost. So that's the answer to that one. And other people who've got more experience than me might want to contribute an answer to that question in the description, and then I'll put that into the written notes that go with this video. So Sue asked me, could you please do some videos and talk about the correct time to start seeds under lights or in a propagator? Well, I already do that. So every month, in fact, today is the 1st of December when I'm recording this, I published a video and a whole load of documentation that goes with that video describing what I'm sowing now under, well, in general, what I'm sowing now. But in the database that supports the video, and there's links to that in the description of the video, I also include how many days I'm going to have things under lights, what temperature I'm going to keep the seedlings at, where I'm going to plant them, so whether I'm going to plant them in a polytunnel or in a low tunnel under cover, or in a cold frame, or just under fleece, or just outside without any protection at all. So I think I do provide all of that information already. You just got to know where to find it. So I will put links in the notes that go with this video to all of those resources, and also my book, which kind of brings together all those resources in a nice kind of integrated fashion. So James asked, why did you decide to eat fresh rather than preserved and frozen food? Well, we do eat some preserved food and a little bit of frozen food. So we do preserve some jams and pickles and sauces and ketchups and things like that. We don't do very much fermenting, and we don't really do very much freezing, but we do freeze a few things, but we've only got a small freezer. And so we generally kind of focus on fruit, and then that fruit is fruit that's going to be used in cooking, obviously, rather than eaten fresh. So, and some of that is kind of a convenience factor, rather than a kind of true storage factor. But generally speaking, we don't like frozen food. We just think it tastes, well, our frozen food, I think, tastes worse than supermarket frozen food, and supermarket frozen food tastes horrible by comparison with fresh food. So really, we want to eat fresh food, and we think that's the massive advantage that you get as gardeners, is that you can eat fresh food all year round that is grown locally, and it tastes great, and it tastes even better kind of out of season. A lot of things mature, like squashes and things like that, they taste amazing. Potatoes, things like that, taste great. Onions taste great. Garlic tastes great. And of course, all of the actual fresh food, your fresh cabbages and your fresh cauliflowers and your fresh beans and whatever it is, they taste amazing. We really like eating seasonally. We've learned to like eating seasonally. Perhaps we didn't really like it quite as much on the first year, but what we realised is that it's just the anticipation you have for new things coming along, and the kind of delight that you have in the things that you've currently got, and the sort of gratefulness that you get from having such an amazing abundance of fresh food to share as well with friends and family. It's just amazing. And that, as I said, that eating seasonally means that you're always eating different things all the way through the year. And if you're not eating different things, like we eat lettuce all the way through the year, but we eat different varieties of lettuce through the year. And there's just something wonderful about that, is that you're just not eating the same diet month after month after month. You're eating a very different diet with lots and lots of variety in it. And as I say, you're just really anticipating new things that are going to come available next month. And that sense of anticipation is really good for the brain, and the mood and all that sort of thing, and it's great for motivation as a gardener. Bernadette asks me about my fitness routine. I would love to see you talk more about your fitness rationale and how you got into the understanding of the importance of balance and core strength. And I guess lots of people see working in the garden as having an allotment as a way of keeping fit, but without the awareness of the potential for injury and the need to warm up, warm down, etc. to avoid injury. Well, yes, this is a complicated question. So, I have definitely had a lot of injuries on the allotment, a lot more than I had before I had an allotment. There's no question about that. And one of the things, there's a few observations about that. The first thing is I have got stronger over time, but a lot of those injuries came from repetitive movements, from too much kneeling, from too much bending, from too much squatting, from too much like pinching out weeds. Got tennis elbow just from pinching out weeds. Got some other injuries from chopping stuff in compost bins and things like that. So there's lots of, gardening involves lots of very unhealthy movement, I think. It's not very healthy to spend that much time bending, kneeling, squatting and all of that. The body is really designed for much more fluid movement. So I, over the years, have tried to diversify my hobbies, so I'm not doing as much gardening. So I do about 10 hours a week gardening. Quite a bit of that is harvesting, and quite a bit of that is watering. So harvesting, you are moving around a lot, lots of stretching, lots of kind of leaning and core and things like that, but it's quick and you're moving, you're not in one position for a long time. So I think that's really healthy. So I really like harvesting. I think that's really good. And I really like watering, because you're just carrying watering cans around with lots of movement, lots of walking. So I think that's good. Planting, is very, that's not very good, because you are kind of kneeling down for quite a long time, but it's only short periods. I don't do that much planting. So if I did a week of planting, it would be unusual probably. or it would probably average out at about a week perhaps over the year. So that is not too bad. So my total of 10 hours of gardening I think is about right. So what I also then do is a lot of cycling, walking, hill climbing, swimming, those sorts of things. And I do a bit of stretching. And I find that I don't really need to do very much stretching because of the swimming, which means you get really good mobility in your shoulders, and your hips and your knees and your ankles and all of that sort of thing. But I do find I get a little of tension in my hamstrings. So I just do a bit of stretching for that. I like to move around a lot, and I think that's really good, rather than sitting for long periods of time. Although I do sit, I do spend quite a bit of time reading, but I try to move around into different locations. So I might be reading in a cafe for an hour in the morning, then I might be reading by the side of the swimming pool, or I might be sitting in the sauna, again a different position. I might be sitting on my sofa here, and then an upright chair, later on in the day, so I'm sort of always kind of changing around the way that I'm sitting. So that, I think, let me just check my list. Oh yeah, carrying grandkids. So that I think is a great core exercise as well. That is my favourite way to get a bit of a core workout, and I do that for about two hours a week. 2 hours 3 times a week, so 6 hours of carrying grandkids. I do a strength workout, even though I'm carrying a lot of compost around and wheelbarrowing stuff and turning compost heaps and things like that, which is pretty good strength. It's not very balanced, you're not kind of ensuring that you get all the major muscle groups working and things like that. So I just do 2 15-minute high-intensity strength workouts a week, and I find that my strength is consistently increasing even with that limited amount, and I've doubled my strength actually over the last 3 years just doing that. So that is pretty good, and if I notice that I start declining, then I might have to increase that a little bit, but for me that works. I'm following basically the Body by Science strength protocol. So John asked me, in response to your Ask Me Anything email, can you tell me which lettuce you find is the best to grow in autumn through winter that is crispy and lasts longer and that you find to have the best flavour? Well, I think it's hard to get a crispy lettuce in winter. I haven't found one yet. But the crispiest on the scale, which is probably 7 or something in the crispiness scale, is Grenoble Red, or Red Grenoble, or Rouge Grenobelese, or whatever it is in French or Italian. And my second favourite is Roxy, but it is definitely not crispy. But Grenoble Red does have a little crispiness to it, and especially it's kind of when it's grown under cover, and the leaves have a kind of delicateness to them and a kind of crunch to them, which I really like in winter, and that's because they're under cover, so they're not getting exposed to the wind, so they don't get tough and things like that. So I think that's really nice. For real crispiness, I think you just have to wait for spring, and then there's 2, maybe 3 options there, but mainly it's the ribs of the lettuce that are going to be crispy. And so I really like Maravilla de Verano Canasta in spring, and that is quite a crispy leaf, but an extremely crispy rib. Navarra has a nice crispy rib, and Winter Density or Winter Gem, both of those have a crispy rib as well, and reasonably kind of crispy leaves. So those were the ones I go for. Now I do have a full guide to growing lettuce all year round, and that goes through all my favourite varieties for each season, all the different sowing dates and all of that sort of thing. So I refer you to that. So Mark said, do you ever look back on life and wish that you'd done something different or regretted not doing something? So, not really. I mean, that's partly a kind of approach to life thing, in that I just like to look forward rather than backward. And I think by default, I would look backward and I would dwell on the past. So I've had to sort of train myself to look forward. and it's been pretty successful, so I don't really now try and dwell on the past. But I think more interestingly is that when I look back at the bad things that happened in my life, we always tried to find the silver lining in those. And I know it's a cliche, but I think we always, I think probably we always did find a silver lining of some sort. And we kind of built on that. And we almost always found that something really good came from that thing that was really bad. And I'll just give you one example of this, because I'm not going to go through all like the trials and tribulations of our lives. But I got a really severe autoimmune disease about 20 years ago now, and it was quite debilitating. It was a lot of pain, a lot of fatigue, a lot of brain fog. Made it really difficult to do my job, made it really difficult to do all sorts of things in my personal life. But it meant I got to work from home, and because I was working from home, I had to train myself to be really efficient and effective, and so a whole new set of skills came from that actually made me really valuable at work, and probably more valuable than I was when I was working full-time in the office. But I also got to stay home. That meant I could support my wife, Debbie, more, and also I was much closer to my kids. I spent much more time with them. So I think, that's just a huge bonus that came from something really bad. And there's lots of examples of that. So yeah, I don't generally look back. But as I said, when I do look back, most of those things, and I might have said, and I did write it in the notes here, that one of the things associated with that was I was told after about 4 years or something like that by the occupational therapist that very few people carry on working with a condition like mine. And most of them just went on permanent sick leave. My company had a pretty good I had a pretty good sickness insurance as part of my package. And so I could have gone off sick and just stayed off sick. But actually, for some quite complex reasons about the way that system worked, that would have been a really bad idea for me. But in one way, it would have been a good idea. And the reason it would be a good idea was because when I did eventually retire, rather than just go on sick, and started gardening and moving more and all these things that I did, I basically shed that autoimmune disease. I got over it, and I live an almost normal life now. I'd have to take a few precautions, and I do occasionally get some little bits of like vestigial sort of autoimmune disease, but it's very limited, very easy to cope with by comparison with how it used to be. So that would have been a good thing to do, but if I'd have done that, who knows how life would have turned out, just because that one aspect of, my lifestyle, that I would be kind of healthier, might have got better. I might have just spent all my time on the allotment and not spent it with my kids, so it might have not turned out as well as it actually did. So Gwen asks the most complicated question to answer, really, which is, why do you not support no dig entirely? Well, that makes kind of no dig sound like a religion, and I think that is kind of why one of the problems with no dig is this kind of religious fervour associated with it that some people seem to exude, and see it as solving all problems. Nothing is worse with no dig. It's universally like the best way to garden in all circumstances and on all soil types and in all sorts of different environments and conditions, and etc. And I just don't buy, I'm always cautious, when I see that sort of religious fervour around something. I just think, is anything always really that good? And so it just makes me kind of think that through, and I'll talk about that in a bit more detail. So I'm generally very excited by no-dig, no-till and minimal tillage approaches to farm scale I think it's amazing, the potential. Especially large farms that are now incorporating kind of cover cropping and green manures, and all of the benefits that come from that in terms of carbon sequestration, soil health improvements, less fertiliser use, less fertiliser runoff, reduced soil erosion, and all of those sorts of things. It's a huge potential, and you can see these big food companies like Nestle investing in these sorts of techniques across hundreds of thousands of farms. So that no-till movement that's kind of come out of the US, I think, is amazing. I think there's still a lot of work to do on the processes and tools to make that applicable to all sorts of different crops, and so there's a massive amount of R&D required to deliver on the potential of that. But I see that as much more exciting really than organic gardening. I think organic has its place. I eat pretty much all organic. I'm a big fan of it personally. But I think this farm scale, no-till kind of approach, or minimal till approach with lots of cover crops and, as I said, lots of green manures and things like that, I think that's more exciting than organic, because you just don't see organic being deployed at the hundreds of thousands of farms sort of scale, and the passion around it in the big food companies. So I'm quite excited about that, but again, I'm a bit cautious about it, because like anything, large and big like that, and corporates and all of that, you don't want to just believe in what they say, you want to see what they do. So when it comes to what I think a lot of people think of as no-dig, it's kind of Charles Dowding's or Richard Perkins' kind of version of no-dig, or Jean-Martin Fortier, those guys. And I kind of inclined to Jean-Martin Fortier's approach, really. So let me just drill into that a little bit. So I think that Charles Dowding has done an amazing job to popularise no-dig. I think it's amazing. It should be highly commended, and I do highly commend him for what he's done there. I think he's come up with some great techniques beyond no-dig, and I think it's just a shame in a way that he talks so much about no-dig, like he can't seem to get a sentence out without including no-dig in it. And he does talk about his other techniques, but he doesn't give them anywhere near enough emphasis, because I think it's the other techniques that actually are much more important in a way than no-dig. I think no-dig is useful, and I'll talk about the other techniques in a minute. And I wish that he was a bit more balanced, really, in the degree to which he kind of evangelises some of the other things that he does, rather than just, as I say, like constant, like no-dig, no-dig, no-dig. So let me just drill into this a little bit more. First, I'll talk about my approach. So I do mulch my beds with compost, and I'm also trying other mulches as well, because it's very difficult at the moment to get hold of good compost, and I think that is one of the big issues at the moment with a no-dig approach. Well, Charles Dowding's no-dig approach, which is a compost-based mulching approach. So I do also leave the roots in the soil. I think that's a great idea, and it's easy. And I think that for most crops, it works. If it doesn't work, I remove the roots. I don't really care. I know the beds will recover. I don't kind of worry about digging the beds. I think they'll recover just fine if you dig them occasionally. And I don't really mean dig them, I mean pull the roots out and disturb the soil. I really prefer to think about not no dig, but minimising disruption or disturbance of the soil. So that's what I'm trying to do. And an example is if I've grown brassicas and I want to grow carrots, for example, then I will take the roots of the brassicas out, because I don't want them getting in the way of the carrots. So I'm not afraid of disturbing the soil. I just try to minimise it when it makes sense. I particularly like Charles Dowding's technique of building new beds on top of grass. I've used that a lot. I think it's a fantastic idea, particularly when combined with cardboard and a good thick 4-inch layer
of compost, maybe even a 6-inch, which will shrink to 4 inches. I think that's Charles's best idea, really. I think I've not seen that from anybody else, really. I think he invented that idea. I think it's great. But I do a few things that Charles doesn't. So I do try and keep living roots in the soil at all times. From what I understand, I think those root exudates coming from those living roots make a big difference to the vitality of the soil microorganisms year round, and it helps those soil microorganisms keep alive and, you know, grow rapidly again in spring, better than just a compost mulch does. So I like to do that. I know not everybody does, and a lot of market gardeners don't do that. They just compost or tarp their beds and then just leave them over winter, and that's just from a practicality point of view. But at my small scale, I can keep living roots in the soil in almost every bed, and not weed roots either. So that's one thing that I think is pretty important and I like to do. But it's just basically because I just want to eat food all year round, and so I want to use every square inch of beds that I've got. I definitely don't believe in this idea of resting the soil. I think what happens when you rest the soil, i.e. you don't have any living roots in it, is that the soil microorganisms either hibernate or die, and so then I need to start growing again in spring. So I don't think there's any advantage to kind of resting the soil. I think much better to have living roots in it. So I did dig my plot initially, and I'm a big kind of proponent of that, and I will talk about that a little bit later, I think. And I do use wooden sided beds. I know Charles talks about the fact that you get lots of slugs down the side of them. Well, I just find that that's mainly due to shrinkage, and if you just push the compost in tightly around the outside of the bed and make sure you haven't got any shrinkage, then you don't get slugs and snails down the sides any more than you get them anywhere else. So I've never had a problem with it. You know, I do have a few slugs and snails, but those slugs and snails aren't down the sides of the beds. They're in the hearts of lettuces and, you know, in the plants, basically. So, yeah, I don't have any issues really with that. And I've taken sides off the beds and not seen any particularly large numbers of slugs and snails that, you know, aren't present elsewhere. So for me, that isn't a kind of issue. And there's loads of advantages of having wooden sides. I mean, there are other disadvantages, of course, is it costs money. But, you know, for me, it's about 5% of harvest costs. So it's not really that significant, you know, when you kind of average it out over a 10-year life of the wood. So I'm quite happy to use wooden sides because of all the advantages. You know, it's neat, it's tidy, it's easy, you can screw things to those sides, and I really like all my hinge tunnels and netted frames and all of those sorts of things. I just find it's just really easy and practical and neat and tidy at my little small scale. Now, a market gardener obviously would not use wooden sides. You know, no market gardener would do that. They would all do what Charles does, and Charles, you know, is a micro scale market gardener, you know, and obviously he used to have, I think, a 10-acre market garden or something, which is really big. So there were, obviously he's come from that environment, so it's no surprise that he doesn't use wooden sided beds. And I think this is the most important thing, is I do add amendments to my soil. Now, I know Charles says compost is all you need. Well, the thing is, compost isn't compost. You know, compost could be horse manure, cow manure, it could be green waste compost, it could be all sorts of rubbish. I mean, I bought compost where I think, God, you know, almost nothing grows in the stuff, it's horrible. You know, it's just like chopped wood or something, you know. And so, yeah, you can't just say compost is all that's required, because it's just so variable in terms of the nutrient quality from one type of compost to another type of compost. So I don't, you know, I'm just not confident in that statement. The other thing is, of course, you know, when Charles makes that comment, he is growing on silty soil. You can't really get better than silty soil. And he's also growing on soil on what used to be, I think, mainly pasture. Not all of his environment was pasture. I think some of it was old buildings or something, but most of it's pasture now. So it's silty soil that used to be pasture, and you just, and then with 4 to 6 inches of compost on top of that, you can't get any better than that, I mean, so if I was growing on that, maybe I wouldn't be so worried about nutrients, but I am worried about nutrients because all of the veg and all of the seasonal fruit I eat comes from a tiny scrap of land of about 200 square meters or something in total. And that's all sandy soil. And the allotments just used to be, I think somebody told me they were just a conventional farm. So, almost certainly like depleted soil that's just had artificial fertilizers added to it, about 30 or 40 years ago. And the guy that had my allotment before me, I think he must have used artificial fertilizers because he didn't have any compost bins. So, I mean, I just don't trust the nutrient quality of my soil. And although plants might grow in it, that is telling you very little about actually the nutrient content of those plants. So, and of course there are reports, and I put them in my book, and Steve Solomon makes a really nice, has a really nice example of his teeth starting to fall out because of nutrient deficiencies when he was self-sufficient off his patch of land. And so it's just a big risk. Now, in my case, recovering from this autoimmunity is a big part of that. The protocol that I followed, which is kind of modified Wall's protocol, required me to get very high levels of nutrients from the organic veg that I was growing. And so nutrients are really important. So there's just no way that I'm going to risk, that the soil that I have, such as it is, the sand basically, it has all the nutrients that I need in all the right quantities and all of that sort of thing. So I do add seaweed. I did add rock dust. I think there's enough rock dust in my soil now, and that will very, very, very gradually be eaten away by the soil microorganisms, and they will release minerals into the soil. So it's not something you need to do again and again and again. And so seaweed and bloodfish and bone are the main things that I add to my soil, in addition to composts. But I also have lots of different composts. So I have cow manure, horse manure, leaves, and mushroom compost, as well as the waste from my own plot, my own homemade compost. So quite a lot over the years, all sorts of different composts from all sorts of different places, which I think is important. So all sorts of different nutrient profiles being, consumed effectively in making that compost. So that's a bit of a ramble. So I do now want to just go through some more specific things, because I think it's just such an important question that Gwen has asked. So when I walk around the allotment site, I'm kind of, there's some amazing allotment plots on my site, and we've also walked around lots of other allotment sites, and a lot of the best ones dig, and quite a few of them rotivate as well. And it's quite humbling, really, to see the quality of those plots by comparison with mine. There are all sorts of different approaches to gardening, I think, is the conclusion that I draw from that. And, that digging and rotivating can, in the right circumstances, be really efficient and really productive and produce huge quantities of food with not a lot of effort. And basically, a lot of people just dig, rake, and hoe. Using those basic techniques, and they incorporate their compost into the soil rather than leaving it on the top of the soil, and they seem to have absolutely great results. So I don't want to be in a position where I'm extolling the virtues of just one approach to gardening when there are other really successful approaches. So that's one of my concerns, and that's one of the reasons that I personally don't, on these videos, talk about no dig all the time as if it's the solution to all of your problems, even though I personally follow it and it works great for me because I'm primarily a raised bed gardener. Now, a lot of the allotment plots that I just talk about are not raised bed gardens, and they dig. So the next one is that I find it, for me, it's getting increasingly difficult to source good composts. So I used to be able to get mushroom compost, which was fantastic. I really liked it. Now I can still get horse manure. I can get quite expensive cow manure. I can't get leaves really, and I can't get wood chips very easily. You know, a lot of things are very and actually bulk compost is extremely expensive. I'll talk about that in a second. And a lot of the composts have got weeds in them. So 2 years ago, I think now, we sourced some well-rotted cow manure, and it looked great. It was really fine grade, really well composted, it seemed. But it was full of weed seeds, and really those weed seeds have established now, and it's extremely difficult for us to get rid of them. I mean, I had to go to ridiculous lengths to try and get rid of these weeds. And of course, I've imported these weeds. They weren't native to my allotment site. They were native to some field, 200 miles away or something. And yeah, they're really difficult to get rid of. And I've still got some of them now, and still struggling to get rid of them. So yeah, there can be a lot of those sorts of issues, and we certainly had horse manure with loads of weed seeds in it. So and obviously homemade compost is quite difficult to get weed seed free as well. Although I am kind of working on techniques for doing that, but it's hard. So that's another one of my concerns: just the difficulty sourcing good quality compost that you can kind of trust to deliver the benefits of no dig, which is the nutritional benefits, but also the weed-free mulching benefits. So now what I tend to do is I tend to buy bagged, sterilised compost for beds that I really need to have a kind of weed-free surface, things like carrots, for example, where I don't want to be going in the bed and weeding them all the time because of the carrot fly. So that's it. So then, yeah, I've already mentioned it's pretty difficult to make weed-free homemade compost. So because of that whole problem with weeds in the compost issue, and of course the horse manure contaminated with weed killer problem, I think incorporating this weedy compost into the root zone of your plants and then covering it with soil might actually make a lot of sense. And I do that with all of my containers, for example. So I always put my homemade compost in the bottom 3/4 of a container, and then I mulch it with a sterile compost like mushroom compost or just bagged compost from the garden centre over the top quarter of the container. And that means that the weeds in my homemade compost they can germinate, but they don't germinate as prolifically as they would if they were on the surface. So the next thing is, I think compost, it can just be ridiculously expensive now. And I actually see people mulching their no-dig beds on my allotment site with bagged compost from the garden centre. I mean, you're talking like pounds, 2 or 3 pounds value for like a metre squared or something. It's incredibly expensive. Probably more than that, actually. So, yeah, I mean, if you take, for example, a 250 metre squared allotment plot and put 2 inches of compost on it, I think that's, 12 tonnes of compost or something like that. And that's probably about £100 a tonne. So you could be talking, over £1,000 to get enough compost to cover what's the standard allotment plot, which is 250 square metres, I think. So, yeah, really expensive. Now, if you can I used to be able to get, in fact, 3 tonne of mushroom compost for £80. And so that made it really cost effective. But I mean, those days have gone now. I just can't source it at that price. So I'm having to really think about what I do with my beds now in terms of just keeping it all cost effective. So on that theme, also just moving 3 tonne of compost is kind of beyond a lot of people on my allotment site, and I struggle. I have to get the kids to come and help me to do that as well. And I'm reasonably fit and healthy, but I've, just moving, because it all arrives and you've got to get it cleared within like 4 or 5 hours, because we have no drop-off space on our allotment, so you're basically taking up parking spaces. So, yeah, I mean, it's hard work to move 3 tonne of anything, in a few hours. So, it's not I don't think it's like a panacea now at market gardening scale, where you can buy, 10 ton of something, and from a local farmer, and you can be confident in it and all of that sort of thing. Then that's fine. But it's difficult at a small scale to do it, I think. So then it comes down to the performance of no dig. So there's very little research on this. I've gone through what research I can find over the years, and I think that at kind of farm scale, large farm scale, where we're talking about no-till, not market gardening, but no-till approaches with cover cropping and all of that, the main benefit that they have seen in those research studies is less watering. And so I think that is something that's definitely come through in Charles Dowding's research as well, although he doesn't talk about it quite as much as I think he should talk about it. But I mean, that's up to him. He can talk about it as much as he wants. But it seems to me that is one of the real big benefits, is that no-dig beds seem to retain water better and they drain better as well. And so he's got trial data that he publishes for his dug bed and his no-dig bed, which basically he treats exactly the same. So he waters them the same, he incorporates exactly the same amount of compost, he just mulches on one and digs it into the other one. And he plants the same crops in both of them on the same day and all of that. So it's a great little kind of micro trial. But what he's shown in the results of that is that from year to year, there's a high level of variability in terms of which crops do best. So it's quite frequent that the crops in the dug bed do better than the ones in the no-dig bed. And then they swap around the year after, and then there's 2 years where they do better in dig, and then they do better in no-dig for a year, or 2 years, and then they do better in the dug. They swap all over the place. So for any specific crop, dig is not necessarily better. It's just better some years than it is in other years. Now that tells me that it's perhaps something to do with something that varies from year to year, and that might be how much rain we get. Now there is three things I think actually that are always better or worse. So his early plantings of spinach always do really terribly in his dug bed. In fact, they often just fail completely in his dug bed. So I don't know why that would be the case. I mean, there's plenty of people who dig their allotments that grow spinach, so I don't understand why his particular dug bed never seems to get a decent spinach harvest. But that's a big difference between the two. The other one is that in his dug bed, his potatoes almost always, not always, but almost always do better. And the other one is that his cucumbers do massively better in his no-dig bed. So something about no-dig that cucumbers really like. And cucumbers account for a huge amount of his harvest from these beds. And so they really skew the results. And if you took cucumbers out, then the difference between the dug and the no-dig bed is very small. And if you took cucumbers and the fact that the spinach fails in the dug bed almost every year, the results are tiny. The difference is tiny between the two. So let's just recap that. So although an individual crop sometimes does better in dug, sometimes does better in no-dig and swaps around all the time, the average yield, incorporating all the crops, is almost always better in the no-dig bed than it is in the dug bed. But most of that improvement is from the spinach and the cucumbers. So that tells me, really, personally, I think it's an amazing experiment and the results are fascinating, but it tells me that there's not really that huge a difference between the two. There's a few crops where there's a really big difference. One is weird, the spinach. One is kind of explainable, the cucumbers, because you would expect cucumbers, being very water hungry, would really like the fact that the dug bed, the no-dig bed, retains more water. But of course there was a simple solution for that in the dug bed. Just give the cucumbers a little bit more water, just an extra watering can each week might equalise the results. But because he wants to give them both the same amount of water, You can't kind of do that experiment. So it just is crying out really for more experiments. Like I would, for example, love to see if you just gave the dug bed a sprinkling of blood, fish and bone, you know, like 20 pence worth of blood, fish and bone, would it be better than the no dig bed? If you gave the dug bed an extra watering can, would it be better? You know, there's so many other variables, you know, that you could try to see if you could equalise the results that you get from the two. But, you know, those haven't been done. So the next one is grubs and cutworms in particular. So because you're not turning the soil, you're not bringing those grubs to the surface, and because you're planting the same day that you clear the bed, which is one of Charles's big kind of techniques, which I like as well, because of that, you're just not bringing these grubs to the surface, and then you're not letting the birds come in and pick over and eat all those grubs. So you just get a lot of grubs in the soil. And so I've had a lot of problems with cutworms, and I have to water with a nematode to kill the cutworms. Otherwise I lose like 30% of my lettuces. Now Charles says that no-dig is better for cutworms. I don't understand how it's better, but you know, Charles has been gardening for like decades and I've only been gardening for 5 years, so he may well be right, but from my perspective, it's way worse for grubs than dug beds. You know, digging is famous really for exposing, you know, critters to the birds to come and eat them, and quite a lot of those things, a lot of the grubs. There's not many of the grubs. Obviously they eat worms as well, but there's not many of the grubs that are good for your soil or for your plants. So I've mentioned already, you know, that Charles Jones are just on like the ideal environment, you know, lovely silty soil that used to be pasture, that's then had like 6 inches of manure on it, that's then had 2 inches every year on top of that, and now an inch or so, now that he's got so much nutrition in the ground and everything, and he started off with really good ground. So, you know, I just don't want to translate those results into my environment, which is just radically different. And I wouldn't want to translate my results and tell people that what I do can be achieved in other types of environments as well. I think everybody has to, you know, think for themselves really, and that's what I encourage. I don't like the idea of just telling people that, you know, this is the way to garden. I think, you know, I like to encourage people to kind of understand the variables involved in gardening and then think for themselves, and that's why I like to make all of my material available for free and available to download and modify to suit your own conditions. So nobody's taken my book up yet, my book offer up yet. You know, take a copy of my book and rewrite it for clay soil, for example, or rewrite it for Canada, or rewrite it for Australia or something like that. But, you know, if you want to do that, you're welcome to do it. So, in conclusion, I think the differences between dig and no dig are kind of quite small, really, based on Charles's data. I haven't done my own experiments. But the benefits that can be achieved by extending the season, organising your successions better, interplanting, relay planting, you know, all these sorts of things, those can deliver benefits that like double your yield rather than give you a 5% or 10% improvement in yield. So that's what you're getting with no dig. No dig's like 5%, and then all these other things are like 95% of the benefits. And that just doesn't come across, although they are part of Charles Dowding's system. You know, just for me, everybody thinks it's the dig and no dig part that's the most important, whereas I think it's the other parts that are most important. So they're the things I personally concentrate on, and so that's why, Gwen. That's why. And so what would I recommend people do? Well, I encourage people to consider digging and rotavating when they get a new plot. You dig it out, dig through it to clear out all the debris, you know, all the carpet, the old landscape fabric, you know, the bricks, the wooden planks, you know, all that rubbish. Dig all that out, level it, because I think a plot that's level is way better and so much easier to manage than one that's all over the place, like a lot of plots are. dig out all the perennial weeds. You won't get rid of them, but you will reduce the perennial weed pressure in the first few years and let you get kind of established. And, you know, and just reducing the perennial weed pressure is worth it. And then, you know, just pull them out, you know, because you can't dig them out because they're too deep rooted. Although there was a guy on my allotment site who did dig out mare's tail. He said he went down 4 feet. He dug the whole plot 4 feet deep. Goodness knows how he did that. And let the birds eat the grubs. So at least in your first year, you've kind of, you know whether you've got a problem with cutworms and things. And then once you've got it levelled and clear, cover it with a tarp if you can't get compost, or cover it with 4 to 6 inches of compost. Now, if you can get a huge delivery, bulk delivery, then that might be effective. It certainly would if you were buying 3 tonne of mushroom compost for £80. I would highly recommend that because you can cover pretty much your whole plot for like £200 or something like that, and you're going to harvest £200 worth of veg, in a month in August. So, you can easily get your money back by doing that. And if you're building raised beds, use the cardboard technique. I think that's great. And again, fill them about 6 inches deep and then let that shrink down to about 4 inches deep. And then that gives you 2 inches to mulch the subsequent year. And then I'd only mulch about 1 inch after that, which is about what your beds are going to shrink anyway. So that's the way to do it. And I've mentioned this already, I think, but I recommend thinking for yourself rather than any kind of religious and adherence to anybody else's garden system, including mine. So thank goodness Gwen's daughter asks a simpler question. How tall are you? Well, I'm 5'8", which is the average height for a man, I think, and it means the whole world fits me perfectly. So it's a really nice height to be. So John asked me, do you think growing in a cold frame or a low tunnel gives better protection than a polytunnel when you think of the airspace and the temperature? Okay, so I think there are lots of variables that go into what's best, and I actually have covered those in a video, which I'll link actually in here, called the pros and cons, I think, of all of those different types of things: cold frames, low tunnels, fleece, polytunnels. And there's a whole chapter in my book as well, which is all about gardening under cover. But in general terms, I think that the best environment to grow in, actually better than a greenhouse, I think, is a polytunnel. And I like a polytunnel because the polythene diffuses the light, so you don't get hot spots. The light comes in and then it kind of diffuses into a diffuse stream of light. And so you get this kind of beautiful kind of quality in a polytunnel where it's evenly lit. And I really like it. There's something kind of calming about it, really, being in a polytunnel that you don't get in a greenhouse. Maybe it's just partly the opaque nature of it as well, just kind of isolates you from the world. But I find it's just the most calming place to be. So anyway, I'm rambling on again. So the polytunnel, I think, is best. It's got a large air volume. That large air volume heats up. It's nice and stable there. It doesn't sort of change throughout the day. Plants like the sort of stability of it all. But because it's large and it heats up really well, you can also have it really well ventilated. And I think that combination of that, the heat and the ventilation in a polytunnel, and I suppose most of that is true for a greenhouse as well, that is fantastic. So if you can afford a large high tunnel effectively, then I think that is the best thing. Now, the things that benefit most from that, I think, are lettuces over winter. They really like that combination of heat and ventilation. Spinach doesn't seem to need as much ventilation, and it doesn't need as much heat, so I find that grows really well in a cold frame. And so lettuces grow reasonably well in a low tunnel, but the nice thing about a low tunnel is it's higher, which means you can interplant into those beds, salad onions and turnips and radishes and brassicas in February and January and February and March, all those sorts of things, and give them an early start. So they're really flexible. So it basically comes down to pros and cons. It is what you want to grow, it depends. And I think a mix of high tunnels, low tunnels and cold frames and fleece is the right way to go. The actual number of each of those depends on what you want to grow and how much of the year you want to grow for. But I have a nice mix of them. I'm pretty happy with the mix that I've got right now. So Ali asked me, you talk of Debbie and the family, but they don't appear on your videos. Do they not garden with you, or do they just not like being on camera? The reason I ask is that you seem to be doing so much on your own, and that plus everything else that you contribute must be overwhelming at times. Well, right, so Debbie has her own plot and she's camera shy. So she gardens on her plot and I garden on my plot, and she does the front garden and I do the back garden, and we work together on anything big. So when we're just kind of pottering around doing our own little bits and pieces, then we are on our own plots and we like that. It's nice and relaxing, and we just do our own thing in our own style, and we garden in very different styles because I focus more on my annual crops and Debbie focuses more on perennial crops because she doesn't have as much time. Gardening is my biggest hobby. Gardening isn't her biggest hobby. So sewing is kind of her biggest hobby. So anyway, so that's why Debbie doesn't appear. Now the kids, well, they help out just on big projects. And so, you know, so when we get big compost delivery or a big wood chip delivery, or we have to clear all the brassicas and get everything replanted or whatever it is, I just don't film them. So they do actually appear in little snips on some videos, but mainly I'm filming when I'm on my own and when family are around. And with my family, I don't want to be filming, so that's kind of why it's like that. Yeah, I think I answered that one. So Mark asked, you seem to be so on top of everything. How did you get on top of all the issues in life? Okay, well, there was a bit of that question previously, that ends answer, which was the overwhelm. Well, I don't get overwhelmed, apart from I was feeling a little bit overwhelmed towards the end of May last year, and that's because of COVID and not being able to take a break. Normally I don't need, you know, all I need is a couple of days away and I feel fine. If I get any kind of sense of overwhelm, but I very rarely get that sense of overwhelm. I feel generally I am on top of things, as Mark says. So let's go on to this one. God, Mark, you asked some difficult questions. So I don't necessarily recommend all these strategies for other people. These are the ones that have worked for me. And we have had to overcome some very difficult times, difficult circumstances, difficult job situations and things like that. So it's not all been plain sailing. Right, so the first thing on my list, and these are not necessarily in order, these are just the way the order they came into my head with. The first one is walk. I think nothing diffuses problems and prepares you to solve problems like walking. And even better if you're walking and talking with somebody else. And maybe those two things are not better, but they are a complement to each other. So it's such a simple thing, but it has been hugely important in my life, is just going out for a walk. To the extent at which when I was working on really difficult and complex projects that were really challenging me, I would park in a supermarket car park that was a mile away from the office, just so that I could walk into the office and walk home from the office at night and kind of process what I needed to confront that day and process what I confronted that day and kind of prepare for going home and being present with the kids and Debbie. So that's the simplest of these strategies. So the next one is that be prepared to work really hard a few times in your life. And that, in my case, has only been probably a dozen times in my life. But really hard work for really focused, short periods of time, and by that I mean 48 hours or something like that, has been massively important in kind of overcoming the most difficult obstacles the most challenging situations, the most competitive situations and things like that. Sometimes there's no substitute for a really hard graft, and I kind of highly recommend it. And sometimes those 48 hours have been continuous, night and day. So, and those were situations, where it was extremely amount of money at stake, or lots of people who couldn't work because systems were down and they needed to get fixed and things like that. So yeah, sometimes hard work is a virtue. I am not a fan of hard work. I've talked about this many times. I am very lazy by nature, but I am not afraid of it. And if I need to work really hard, I will work really hard. But most of the time, very relaxed. So be prepared. I think, again, nothing smooths out the big and small challenges in life like being prepared. If you are in a situation where something difficult is in your future, having prepared for it in advance makes all the difference. If you've got a difficult meeting with a doctor about something life-threatening, doing your research in advance and being mentally prepared and mentally resilient, ready for that discussion makes a big difference. If you're walking into a meeting where you need to win, then being really well prepared in that meeting is, important. If you're going to sell, you've got to be really prepared for that meeting. All these sorts of situations. If you want to convince somebody of something really important, being prepared. So there's all sorts of things. Financially, be prepared. There's lots of things. It just translates into everything. But yeah, there's loads of time when you have, when you're bored, you don't know what to do, that sort of thing. Prepare for the difficult times in those times when you don't know what to do. So that's kind of the way I think about it. And I do that now still, so just in my simple, relaxed, good life that I live now, when it's a rainy day, I spend the time preparing, planning, giving myself something productive to do rather than just sitting around and watching telly. So, right. Also understanding that money is just a resource. Now, this is a very important message I always try to get over to my kids. There's nothing special about money. It's just one resource. It's just like time, energy, all these other things, that are resources that you have. Money is just another one of those resources. It is there to be spent. It is there to be used. It's not just there to be accumulated. It's not something to be scared of or anything like that. Money doesn't really have a fantastic correlation with happiness once you get above a certain level. So money is often just there to solve problems. It's not just there to kind of squander on feel-good things, because actually you can be really happy without spending money, but actually it's quite difficult sometimes to solve problems without money. So I tend to think of money as a resource to solve problems rather than a resource to make me happy. I have no problem being happy without money. So the next thing on here is be thankful for the best of life. So I think there's always something to be thankful for. I write a daily diary, written it for decades. I think it's fantastic. I highly recommend writing a diary. And I'm always amazed at how many things there are in life to be thankful for when I'm writing that diary, and just in general. And I'll just give you like an example of how I lived for a year. So when I left home for university, for some strange reason that I won't go into, I ended up arriving in university in January rather. I actually arrived in December to try and find somewhere to live in January. And if you've ever tried to find somewhere in a university town to live in January, it's extremely difficult because all the places have been taken in September. So I got a flat, eventually it had broken windows, just like huge amounts of rain and wind blowing through these windows. It had one heater for the whole ground floor of the flat, multiple rooms, bathroom, kitchen, etc. One hit the little heater. It had cockroaches in the kitchen. The kitchen was just disgusting generally, broken windows in the kitchen, etc. The bed was completely wrecked, and I had to kind of go out and find an old door in the back garden that had been thrown out there, clean that up and use that to repair the bed. There was no hot running water at all in the house, and I had a great time. I loved it. You know, I didn't love the house, but I had loved all the other things that were going on that were great in my life, and the house was just, you know, it's just one little aspect of it. And you know, I was young and resilient, and it taught me a fantastic lesson. You know, in that I didn't need an amazing place to live to be happy. And, you know, so it's given me like that confidence for the rest of my life, you know, that I could live poor if I needed to and still be happy. And that's kind of an amazing feeling. And I do come on a little bit later to a technique that I use to deal with those sorts of difficult situations in a minute. So the next one is be strategic. And I'm not going to go into that in much more detail because I've done a whole podcast, video all about that. And wrote an article about, you know, how I approach living life strategically. So yeah, go look at that, and I'll put a link to that in the description below. So the next thing is I really think that petitioning your time and your other resources, especially money, is really useful. So sometimes it's really difficult when you're really busy or stressed or whatever the situation is, to find time for things that don't seem really that important at that time. And so a great example of that, of course, is you're really busy at work and you haven't got time for your kids. And I think it's important then to petition your time and say, you know, 6 to 8 is for the kids and the weekends are for the kids and your wife. And it doesn't matter how important work is, you've petitioned off those slots of time. And you can do the same thing, obviously, with anything like, for example, I talked about walking into the office. I petitioned that time, but I also, for, well, I don't know, 15 years or something like that, while I was working, before I got sick actually, I would always go out for breakfast at a local cafe by the beach. It meant I always arrived at work late, like 9:30 or something like that. And it didn't matter how busy I was, I always went to that cafe and I always had breakfast there. And I always just sat down and relaxed. No matter how busy I was, I just found time for doing that. And it's a bit like the same phrase around meditation, you know. Meditate for 30 minutes a day, unless you're really busy, in which case meditate for an hour. It's just about petitioning your time. And I think it's hugely powerful, that idea. And petition your money, you know. So again, I think it's just great when you're living on a small amount of money. And Debbie and I, for example, we lived on my grant for a year because Debbie didn't get a grant for some circumstances that I won't go into. And you know, a grant is not very much. A basic grant at university, it's pretty terrible, really. And yet both of us lived on that quite successfully and had a great time. And yeah, so and when we were doing that, we both had pocket money. And it wasn't very much pocket money, but we both had pocket money, and we could spend that pocket money on whatever we wanted to. And the other one of us would never say to each other, like, why did you spend that? So it was what we call, and I still call, guilt-free spending. I've got a lot more guilt-free spending now than I had then, but yeah, I think it's just a really great technique, is to kind of take your money and divide it up for different things. So this is how much we've got for holidays, this is how much we've got for guilt-free spending, this is how much we've got for kind of household repairs and whatever. One of the things that we do is we take the money that we would have spent on insurance policies for things like iPads or whatever, and we put that into an account, and that is called our insurance account. And over the years, it's grown to have quite a few £1,000s in it. And so when anything goes wrong in life, we just pay for it from the insurance account, unless it's like, you know, the house roof blowing off or something, then the household insurance covers it. But you know, for all the little things that go wrong in life and the kids' lives now, because as I say, there's lots of money in this account, because it's amazing how much you accumulate in an insurance account when you don't spend money on insurance policies, apart from household insurance and contents and car insurance, which are kind of mandatory. But all the little insurance policies that you could be tempted into taking out, those are the ones we didn't do. We just put it in this account. And it's amazing how freeing it is, because we can't spend that money on anything else. So it just accumulates and accumulates and accumulates, and it doesn't matter now kind of what goes wrong in life. You know, a car could blow up or something like that, I don't know, and not being insured. We've got the money in that account, and that's what it's for, solving those problems in life. And so we don't feel like any pain when we spend that money, because that is what it's for. It can't be touched for any other purpose. It is for fixing problems in life when things go wrong. And so it's the same with guilt-free spending. That money is there to be spent on whatever I want to spend it on, you know, without any kind of like, oh, how did you spend that? Like, no, it's mine to spend, whatever, don't mind. It's to be spent. And I've petitioned it at a level that's affordable, and so it's guilt-free. So that's the way I like to think about this whole petitioning of resources and all that. So it's kind of similar to that, but slightly different, is the concept of living within your means, but I like to describe that as slack, and I've done another video about slack, but basically it means just having a little bit more time and a little bit more money and a little bit more energy and a little bit more of everything than you need. And when you've got a little bit more of everything, life is really easy. And when you've got a little bit less than you need, a little bit less time, a little bit less energy, a little bit less money, life is really hard. And that's simple to say, but then what it means is work really hard at figuring out how to have a little bit more of everything in life. And everything's easy. And then you can just increase from that baseline, but cut your spending to below what you've got, and life is easier. Manage your commitments in life so they're just a little bit below the time that you've got. Life is easy, etc. And that's why I don't feel overwhelmed, because I've done that for 30 years or so. I'm well trained. Save 50% of every pay rise. So this is something we did. It might not work for everybody, but that's why I retired at 52. And and I put 50% of every pay rise into pension, and so that worked. And so, I highly recommend it, because that means you still get a pay rise. You just don't get quite as big a one, but then if you're living within your means with the previous amount, it means you're still going to feel rich, even though you're only getting half of it, and it means you're still going to be rich when you're older. Not that we're rich, but I mean, we just live within our means, and so we feel rich. So this is a really important one. I know we're nearly at the end actually of this video now, so pay attention to this last one. Prepare for the worst and hope for the best. Now that sounds like such a glib little cliche, but the power is in how you execute on it. So this is the sort of technique I would use for, well, everything in life you can use it for, but it's particularly powerful when something really bad might happen in, 3 months' time. You might lose your job. A child might die. So those are situations, I've faced a few times. And the way you deal with this, or the way I deal with this, is that I really visualize the negative outcome. And I kind of really go into the details of it. So I imagine it happening. Let's just take, because it's not quite so emotional, losing your job rather than a child dying. You really think through, you imagine being told, sorry, you've been made redundant. You imagine like opening the letter and finding out that, you're only going to get like £3,000. How are you going to live on £3,000? You imagine all of that. You imagine telling your wife and your kids that they can't go on holiday anymore, that we kind of sell the car and all that sort of thing. You imagine all the pain, that you're going to have to deal with. You might lose your house. I don't know. Imagine it all. It's really upsetting. You're crying. You imagine getting through it and coming out the other side and realising that actually maybe you could live a decent life on half the money. Maybe you will find another job, whatever. You just imagine coming through it. You don't have to imagine that in great detail. Just imagine coming through it. You imagine, yes, I'm going to survive. We will be okay. We will get through this. It's better if you do it with other people as well that are going to be affected. Wife, probably not with kids. Like, don't traumatise your kids. But yeah, your wife as well. Like, do it together. If it's a really significant, I probably wouldn't actually cry about losing a job, but if it was a child dying, I did, for a few times. I did cry that out way before it was likely to happen. And the effect is amazing. I recommend you take, maybe 2 hours to do that. Maybe for a child dying, maybe it's a day. It's a big thing to work through that. And then it's when you come out of that, because it is only fiction, right? So you can come out of it, but it's a bit like an immunisation. You kind of prepared yourself. You've realised that you can cope with it. You've realised it's not, you will be able to live with it. You will get through it. You've imagined getting through it. And then for the rest of that precarious period, while you're thinking, am I going to lose my job or not? Is this child going to die or not? Then you've coped. You're all right. You're fine. And it's amazing how freeing it is and how normal life is in this period where ordinarily you would be crippled by anxiety and worry. And in previous times before I discovered this technique, I was. And then all of a sudden it's like, no, it's fine. I can cope. I can deal with this. I know I can deal with it. And it is, saying it now, it's kind of hard to believe, but it does work. And it has been an amazing technique for dealing with really kind of challenging circumstances and getting through them and then just living a normal life after it. So yeah, I think that is pretty good. Now on a kind of more uplifting topic. Susie asked, what aspects of your lifestyle do you believe had the biggest impact on your health since you retired? Well, I'm certainly feeling one of them now. That is moving around. God, I've been sitting far too long doing this video. So I think the most impactful change is moving around a lot throughout the day. Doing lots of low intensity fluid exercises like walking, cycling, swimming, pottering around the allotment, etc., etc. I just think, before I was sitting down for 8 hours and now I'm just moving around all the time. And when I'm sitting down, I'm in lots of different postures. So the next thing I think is looking after my grandkids and being there for my kids. It's just great to be there for your kids, and it's even better to be kind of there for your grandkids. So has been a huge thing for me since retiring, being there for them. And actually for being there for Debbie, because it allowed her to kind of have a second career for a few years and really kind of embrace that. And I was there to look after the house and do all the cooking and all that. I think seeing progress every day. I mean, when I was working, if I saw progress year to year, I was really happy, in a strategy role. But now I see progress every day in all sorts of aspects of my life. I feel healthier every day, and I'm growing stuff, and I see the kids growing up and the grandkids growing up and things. My life is just full of progress. It's so motivating. It's lovely. Having my hands in the soil, I think, has been huge. I don't wear gloves. I want to have my hands in bacteria and fungi and all of that. And I just think that really helps the body. That is our natural condition. We evolved with our hands in the soil. And to get your hands in the soil again, I think, cures a lot of ills. And I credit that with a lot of the improvements in my autoimmune condition, and also eating food fresh, without it being washed, or if it is washed, like if it's a carrot or something, we would wash the carrot. But there's still loads and loads of soil bacteria and fungi and whatever sort of clinging to that skin. We don't scrub it or anything like that. So eating lots of fresh food. I eat a salad every day of the year. And there's loads of stuff in that, there's loads of radishes and carrots and ochre and leaves and all of those sorts of things, and lots of them will be covered in soil bacteria even though they're rinsed. So that has been massive, I think. I think also the kind of frequent, natural and relaxed social interactions through the day. So in the jacuzzi, in the steam room, in the sauna, on the hiking trail, on the allotment, just loads of lovely, like, short hellos, exchanges about the weather. Isn't this a beautiful view? What are you growing today? What are you harvesting? All that. Just lots of little, like, lightweight little social interactions just to sort of, sprinkle through the day. It's been really lovely. And all of them are kind of stress-free interactions, not like work, they had like these big intense interactions. Taking an afternoon nap has been really great. Sharing our produce with friends and family for free has been amazing and freeing for us, because we never worry that we're going to run out of food, because we always have a surplus because we're sharing it with other people. The intellectual challenge of growing year round and communicating how to do it through these videos and the book and all of that has been amazing, as has the sense of purpose that comes from helping other people, both kind of in the real world on the allotment and the kids and the grandkids, etc., but also virtually through this sort of medium. So that is it. Oh, my goodness, that is a long video. So that was my first Ask Me Anything. Feel free to ask other questions or follow-up questions below, and I might do one of these every month if lots of people ask questions, or never again if people don't. My name's Steve. This is the Seaside Kitchen Garden and Allotment channel, and I'll see you soon.